we are a complementary set of services. So we had the network business with the NLD, ILD, and SD-WAN offerings and the ISP offering. We have the data center and cloud business, and we also have the system integration and managed services and managed security services business. So these kind of cover an end-to-end spectrum for our over 3,500 corporate clients. When the government, Vajpayee government at that time announced the privatization of the internet, that's when I decided to do something where I could use internet for businesses. At that time, everybody was looking at internet for retail subscribers. People's valuations were dependent on how many eyeballs and how many subscribers they had. And nobody was really targeting businesses, right? So that's when I thought of doing this. I would say from 2001 to 2007, we were a single data center. We had a single data center in Mumbai, right, which is about a 5,000-6,000 square foot. Today, we have more than 1.5 million. We're doubling that to 3 million in 18 to 24 months. And, we're from being such a small player, we're now India's largest player. So I think if that self-belief, fundamentally, if the business fundamentals are strong and you believe in the business, and, I think that's the key advice I would give to budding entrepreneurs. Yeah.
Sharad, and I just want to dig a little bit into, you mentioned till 2007, you were a single data center company. And then you kept expanding across cities. And now you've got, I think, 9 locations at the moment, if I remember correctly. And I'm sure they'll expand even more. Right?
Yeah. So we have 10 data centers in four cities, but we have offices in multiple cities, correct? Yeah.
Of course, offices much more. So 10, not 9. So my question was actually, when you look back at the last decade, especially, there were 2 clear chapters. One was the expansion of NetMagic from being a single city, single location company to, multiple location company. And then the second chapter was the acquisition by NTT, which we'll come to. But I just want to get you to opine a little bit, maybe take a couple of minutes and tell us, when you look back to those days, when you went into growth mode, and multi-locations, multiple cultures into the company, different states, how did you find yourself changing as a leader? What were the 2 or 3 things that you were doing differently then?
So I think one, and that's a great question, Jaideep. One of the key things was, constantly communicating, right? We had to, so the initial employees that we hired, right, in each of these locations, the leaders that we hired in these locations, I made sure that they were first of all, that their thinking was similar. So I spent a lot of time in looking at, their overall thinking, not only just on their skills, but also on, how they were a cultural fit. Also, the fact that they could take initiative, because I knew that in Bombay, which is our headquarters, the entire senior management is present, and we'll always be. I'm there, and others are there all the time for people to, kind of help teams. And it's not the same when you're remote. Although now COVID times have taught us that it doesn't matter where you are, but obviously the thinking at that time was different. So I think a lot of emphasis on the ability to be the initial employees were super motivated. They were people who took a lot of initiative. There was constant communication. We still do. At that time it was more frequent, but now we do an all hands meet every month. In fact, we have one later today, and so it was the constant communication, the constant visits. We made sure that senior management visited these places. They never felt there were awards given. They never felt that they were like a step child or something like that. We made sure that they were included in all key decisions. They were the senior teams in these locations. They were very integral part. We did this thing we call as a family day, where we did family day we have these annual cricket matches which we've been having for many years now, and we made sure that there was complete inclusion from all cities, even if it meant flying down people or us flying down there or whatever. So I think the communication being constant communication, the constant reiteration of values, right, and the real benefit I got was that the initial employees of these locations were people who were super motivated, super charged, and took a lot of initiative. So really credit to them.
Interesting. Okay. It's very interesting, Sharad. I've always said this to my friends. In business school, all of us used to focus on strategy, finance, marketing. And when the organization behavior class used to come along, then everyone would find a reason to try and bunk it. 20, 30 years later, you realize that was actually the only class that counted. Right? So I've observed this with, leader after leader who I've had the pleasure of interviewing, that the conversation is always about how do I keep my people motivated, how do we retain our best talent, how do we attract the best talent. And this is even pre-COVID, by the way, right? No one sits and talks about the 8-hour-long strategy sessions they did, or how good they are at manipulating spreadsheets, or the ROI numbers they're looking at, and so on. Everyone's always focused around the organization. I think that's probably the biggest lesson I have learned from this series of conversations that I've had the pleasure of having. Let me come to the second part of the last decade. Things were going well. I know NetMagic was consistently doing really well, growing very rapidly. And then you took a decision to become part of the NTT family and partner with them. Tell us a little bit about what drove you to do that, because I know that your business was doing extraordinarily well. So it wasn't a financial compulsion of any sort. I think it was, my hypothesis is that it was broader than that, larger than that. So do share with us what made you take that decision.
Absolutely, Jerry. So what happened was, so one of the challenges in the data center business, right? And you're absolutely right. We were doing really well. We were growing really nicely. In fact, and our board members, and we were fortunate to have some awesome board members, not only Jagdish, but also Sandeep Singhal from Nexus, Raj Dugar from Fidelity, some really good board members that we had. And we were gearing to take this company public, right? So that's, obviously, end of the day, venture capitalists want an exit at some point in time. And they were saying that, we'll take it public. And, one of the challenges we had, right? We had to, being a capital intensive business, every few years, we had to raise money to build new data centers to expand. Now, what happened was in 2011, there were a lot of M&A in this space. So 21 Vianet in China went public. There was Equinix, the world leader in data centers, acquired a company in Brazil. There was some good M&A that happened in the US where Verizon acquired Telemark. So there was a lot of activity in this space because by then cloud computing had become well established. By then data centers were hot. It was so it was natural that people would start looking to the next growth engine, which was India. So if something happening in Brazil, something happening in China, India is obviously the next destination. So it suddenly happened that we started getting feelers from multiple players, and I went, was running my business. I would get a call, and suddenly I would find these investment bankers and with their client in my office and saying, initially saying that we want to do a strategic partnership, and then suddenly I realized that they wanted to, potentially acquire us or take a stake in our company. And this happened once, it happened twice, and then I told, I obviously reported this to my board, and I said, guys, my only problem is I don't have the time to sit and talk to so many people. And then the board took a very smart decision. They said that, look, you need to constantly raise capital. You're looking to go public. Why don't we do a process and see if they're willing to value you as much, if you get a good enough valuation, so we get a good exit, then we don't need to go through the, pressures of going public. And, that has its own set of challenges. You have to constantly report numbers. You have to all kinds of other additional pressure on the company. So why don't we
treadmill of the quarter, I call it. The treadmill of the quarter.
As you rightly said, right? Not that we have, we still have quarterly pressures, but it's not as bad. So, so they said, why don't we just explore it and see it? So we ran but I said, look, I don't have the time. So we hired an investment bankers. We hired Credit Suisse, and they basically they ran a process where there were 10 companies that expressed interest in acquiring us. And one of the reasons that there was so much focus on us at that time, nobody had reasonable scale that was not already public. So there were the Reliance, Infocom, and there was Airtel and others, but they were like very large companies that were public, and we were the only nimble small player that was growing aggressively that was available. So naturally everybody looked at us, and in the I didn't want to completely exit because I knew that there was a huge upside, not only in the business, but also I thought we had just scratched the surface. There was a lot more to do. One of the reasons for selecting NTT, right, was that we felt that there was a culture fit between the two organizations. They, unlike some of the other cultures where there's a hire and fire culture, this was very similar to Indian culture. And not only that, I wanted to grow the business. They were in for the long term. Access to capital would have not been a problem with being with NTT. We could learn from each other best practices. We had a cloud practice. They were happy to take that learning from India and take it across the world. They were happy to take our managed services offerings also to the rest of the world. So there was a lot of synergy that we saw. And I felt they would be the perfect partner, and they've been a great partner ever since. So that's the reason we selected NTT.
Wonderful, sir. Turning to the final chapter, and just conscious of time here, it's quite normal for entrepreneurs to be sort of acquired and then a year and a day later, as soon as the lock-in finishes, they walk away. But here we are 5 years later, and you've ended up actually in the leadership role. Congratulations once again for that. Aside from the cultural fit, what made you stay on?
So I'll just correct you. 2012, they acquired majority stake, and then
was it 2012? Okay.
Yeah, they acquired majority stake in 2012. So it's actually been 10 years
it's a decade now.
Yeah.
I guess my question is even more weighty then.
Yeah. So I still kept significant stake, and then when NTT looked at merging the various businesses, then it made sense. Then it made sense for them to kind of control the entire company, and that's where I sold the remaining stake. And the reason I decided to continue was because they allowed me to do my own innovation. So today we have a team in Pune where we've come out with, even in the pandemic, we came out with 5 or 6 new product offerings, right? And the beauty is that whatever we do in India, we share, we try to align with the global strategy of NTT, and we can share our knowledge there. We get to learn from them. We get to share them. So there's a lot of satisfaction that my team and I get in being able to creating products and services that can be used across the world, right?
Across the world.
That's the reason that I decided to stay back. And honestly, the only time they've left the business, they've not interfered in the business. They've given me a free hand, and so it's almost like I feel I'm an entrepreneur at NTT, and the only time I have to really interact a lot with them is when I have to raise serious capital. In October, they announced a $2 billion investment in India for data centers, renewable energy plants, and undersea cable. And that's when that's where we have to interact a lot with the global management and get approvals. But that we would have to do even if I was doing a private equity backed venture.
Sure.
And so given the flexibility and freedom that NTT have given, that's the reason I've stayed. Yeah.
Wonderful, sir. And you're doing this, or rather I would say, you're overseeing this very large capex, and this is obviously a long-term game, as you said earlier in the show as well. But in the short term, we are all faced with a very severe business shock. States are locking down, cities are locking down, and paradoxically, when all of us were in our planning cycles in calendar Q1, which would be fiscal Q4, the virus seemed to be a little bit under control. So growth targets were aggressive. Everyone was bullish. Give us a little bit about what you're doing now to really be able to create those shock absorbers for your business over the next 2-3 quarters in the short term, and sort of alleviate the pain from a business perspective that the virus might bring in.
Yeah. Again, a great question. You're right. We did our planning last year. Obviously, there was a little bit of impact. In our case, actually, the business, we are fortunate that we're in a sector that actually some portions of our business actually grew during the pandemic. So whether it is the cloud business, whether it's the security business, but there was some impact. For example, in the first quarter of last year, construction was stopped, right? So we had 3 data centers under construction. One was nearing completion that got delayed by a couple of months, and therefore we lost revenue for a couple of months. So this year we factored into account. We obviously took very aggressive targets because we had to make up for. We still grew very healthily, but we didn't grow as much as we wanted to. And so this year we obviously took a little bit more aggressive targets. I think fundamentally this time around, I think even the governments when they're locking down, right? They're not locking down. A, we are in essential services, so we're not completely locked down. B, the on-site construction is allowed, so our construction activity is right now not impacted. And and we've also understood, right, that we have to be careful. One of the benefits of the merger, right, was that we stopped new recruitment, because we said that, look, we want to first fully ensure that our existing team gets all the opportunities that there are, and we knew that we are growing. So rather than cutting jobs last year, what we focused was on repurposing our staff so that we could, hire within rather than look outside. So we didn't end up hiring too many people or anything last year to prepare for this year or anything like that. So I think from a cost perspective, we were well covered. And some of the new products and services that we came up with, especially in the security space, in the disaster recovery space, like we did DR as a service, we came up with 4 or 5 new security offerings. They're already starting to see results, right? We developed them during the pandemic, we're already seeing results. And some of the data center construction activities, now they're coming to closure. And so there are a huge order backlog that we have. A lot of servers could not be shipped. And so there's a huge backlog. So I believe we will be able to meet our this year's target because of the sheer backlog, not only in orders that we have, but also in customer spend, right? Last year, a lot of people kind of looked at controlling costs. I believe that. And I believe as vaccinations take on, so maybe there may be a little bit of slowness compared to what we had assumed in the first quarter, but I believe post that we should be.
Wonderful, sir. Wonderful. Let me turn the page now, Sharad, and in closing ask you, I know you're a very hardcore IPL fan and a cricket fan, and you mentioned earlier how you've been using cricket as a way to also, keep your folks engaged and entertained. What's your prediction for the IPL this year? Who's going to win it, you think?
Always Mumbai Indians.
Always am I. Okay. Offline, we'll talk about the wager we're going to have on Delhi Capitals versus Mumbai Indians. But do you get time these days to play the tabla at all? I know you're a musician of sorts as well.
I think in the pandemic, I ended up playing a lot more than I did earlier, because obviously at home a lot more. And so I ended up playing a lot more. So, love playing the tabla, listening to music, watching IPL now. And then I used to run a lot. Now I run only within within our building campus, but not outside. And so getting a lot more time with hobbies, a lot of reading that I didn't get a chance to do earlier. So
super. Well, Sharad, it's been an absolutely wonderful conversation. And I'd like to thank you for taking time out to join us here at the Corner Office Conversations. So, ladies and gentlemen, Sharad Sanghi, entrepreneur, manager, leader, cricket buff, technologist, and tabla player. Please join me in thanking him for taking time out for us. And I'll be back soon with a new episode of the Corner Office Conversations with you.
Thank you, Jay.
Thank you, sir.